Hi, this is Corey from Podfly Academy. Today we're going to be looking at mixing down your podcast, encoding it, and adding ID3 tags and album artwork. I know this sounds like a lot of daunting terms off the bat, but we're going to find that it's actually really straightforward. In today's case, we're going to use Audacity, as it's the program that we've downloaded and showed you how to install. In future specializations, keep your eyes open for mastering secrets of the pros, using things like Adobe Audition. But for today, let's use the free program and mix down a very simple podcast. In order to demonstrate the mix down, I'm going to put together a quick podcast. This one is going to consist of an intro, a spoken section, and an outro. Very, very simple. You'll notice here that I have my MP3 files on my desktop. I'm just going to drag them into Audacity. So my intro appears on the first track. I'm going to drag the file 001, which is my recorded voice. And I'm going to put a file called bump. This bump is a little section of audio that we're going to use at the end of the podcast. Now I have 3 sections of audio, or 3 tracks. Obviously, we don't want them to all start simultaneously. So what I need to do is I need to move these tracks so that they play when I want them to. I can select here the Move tool, grab the audio track, and move it anywhere in the timeline that I wish. Now that I have the tracks in position, I want to go ahead and press play.
Broadcasting to you live.
I can zoom into the area that I want to do a finer edit on. And you'll see here that I have a little bit of music.
Panama Jam.
Welcome back to Bocchetti Chatter.
That is simply going to play before the announcer starts. The first thing I want to do is I want to move that announcer right to the beginning of the music section. However, you'll notice here on the WAV file that the music does not fade out. Going to my selection tool, I can highlight the music, go to Effect, and select Fade Out. Now the music is going to fade out while my announcer starts his voice.
Welcome back to Bocchetti Chatter. Our radio show is heard every Wednesday.
Zooming out to the end of the podcast, you can see that I have a little section of music here as well. This is going to be what's called bumper music. It's basically in place to fade out towards the end of the program. I'm going to move it to just after the end of the announcer's voice. The same idea with the intro. I need this music to fade in rather than fade out. So I'm going to use my selection tool, highlight the section, select Effect, and fade in. And now the music is going to fade in with the announcer. Now that I've done a basic edit and created my show, I need to mix all of these tracks into one file. This is very easily accomplished. I simply need to go to File, Export, determine where I want my file to go, and name it. In this case, I'm going to call it My Podcast. The format that I'm going to choose here is going to be uncompressed. In this case, I'm going to do a WAV file. And then click Save. Audacity is letting me know that these tracks will be mixed down into a single mono channel in the exported file. This is not an issue as we're not doing a stereo podcast in this case. In this case, I'm going to click OK. I can enter a little bit of metadata into this as well. The artist's name, the track title, and more. In this case, you're free to do so if you wish, but we're going to show you a better way to do it using iTunes after the fact. Simply click OK. There's some debate within the podcast industry as to whether or not you should render things down to a WAV file and then encode it into MP3 using a separate program. This depends on the application that you're using. For example, a lot of professional people in radio and podcasting use Adobe Audition. This is a wonderful program, really great to work in, and has amazing sounding encoders. So no matter which program you use, you can choose whether or not you're going to make it an MP3 file within the application or do it separately in iTunes. Today we're going to take a look at taking a WAV file and making it into an MP3 using the free application iTunes. The reason why we put this into a WAV file is simple. We want to have the highest resolution file possible before we import it into iTunes. iTunes does a lot better job of Audacity and the lame encoder that you need to install with it of creating a good quality sounding MP3. In addition, iTunes does a great job of something called ID3 tags. This is the name of the artist, the album artwork, and more. However, if you want to simply use Audacity to create your MP3 version, you can. You simply go to File, Export, and then here you can choose what file format. Clicking on Save creates an MP3 file. Now that we've created a final mixed version of our podcast, let's open up iTunes. I recommend in iTunes that you create a playlist for your podcasts. This is not for the podcast that you'll be listening to, but rather the podcast that you're going to be converting into MP3. Going up to File and New, I can create a new playlist. Let's call this playlist Mixdowns. Now I can go into my playlist and I see Mixdowns. Grabbing the file and dragging it into the playlist, you'll see that my podcast now appears. Remember, this is still in WAV form. This is an enormous file and far too big to distribute on the internet. Before I convert this to an MP3 version, I need to change the default settings in iTunes. iTunes, out of the box, creates an AAC version of this file. This is not what we want. We need to change the preferences by going to iTunes and Preferences. Here you can see Import Settings. Notice that it creates import using AAC encoder. I want to change this to MP3. The default is high quality 160 kilobits per second. That's absolutely fine. Click OK. Now I can right-click on my file, and you'll notice that I have an option here to create an MP3 version. And now it's done. I can search through my library for this file. Here are the two versions of my podcast, one being a WAV and one being an MP3. Clicking on Get Info pulls up the information on this file. You'll notice the type here is an MPEG audio. That is MP3. It gives you the file size and more information. This is where we want to enter our album art, MP3 tags, and more. Each of these sections gives you an opportunity to fill in the artist, the album name, the grouping, some comments, the genre, and more. It makes it extremely search-friendly and compatible with all of the different players on the market. We strongly recommend that you add artwork, tag your podcast, and make it super searchable on the internet. This also helps with iTunes, with your podcast distribution system, and more. This is really a critical stage in making sure that your file and your podcast is complete. After we've entered all of the ID3 tags, album art, and information for our MP3 podcast, we can simply take this right out of our library, drag it onto our desktop. This is where we're going to be able to upload it to our server in order to distribute. Now we've created our MP3 file. We have ID3 tags, album art, and everything ready to go to have it distributable on the internet. The next step will be uploading this to the server of our choice so that people can download and subscribe. In future specializations, I'll remind you that we will be looking at a variety of ways of doing this. But today we looked at the most basic, using Audacity with programs that are free and already installed on our machines. For more information about this, transcripts, and more, head to podflyacademy.com.